Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of the world. Good evening, good afternoon, depending upon where you are watching us. And we want to thank you all for joining us this evening as we are here for another event in our CS Ed Week 2021. My name is Nate Myers, and I'm joined by my amazing partner, Ms. Sheila Lee. Sheila, you want to say hello?
Yep. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. If you joined us for our first event, welcome to our next session.
So we're just going to jump right into it. We had a great event today earlier with a few of our CS heroes, and we just touched on a host of topics and whatnot. And this evening, we're going to be joined by the Kapor Center as we're going to do a deep dive into discussions about identities and belongings in computer science. Earlier today, as I said, we jumped off our week with an amazing panel discussion. And, as I was looking at the Kapor Center and the work that they do with identities and belonging and how we tear down those barriers in terms of who gets to participate in computer science, it was not lost on all of us that two of our three CS Hero panelists today were women of color. And as a STEM teacher and a computer science teacher myself, I'm constantly, and Sheila as well, we're constantly seeing how do we continue to get underrepresented groups, minorities, women involved in the field. So we are super excited to have the Kapor Center with us this evening, and just excited for what they're going to talk about.
And at this time, we'd like to take this time to thank our sponsor, the Cognizant Foundation, for sponsoring this and other CSEdWeek events for 2021. So thank you, Cognizant Foundation. Now, kicking off our session on identities and belonging in CS, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Allison Scott, the CEO of the Kapor Center.
And we also have Shayna V. White, the Senior Associate for CS Equity and Justice Initiatives. And we have our guests with us.
Yep, and we're ready to begin. Thank
There
you.
they go. There goes Shayna and Allison. Welcome, ladies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nate. Thank you, Sheila, for the introduction. And on behalf of my colleague Shayna White and myself and our entire staff at the Kapor Center, we would like to extend a warm welcome to you all and welcome to CSEdWeek 2021. So we are super excited to be in partnership with our CS colleagues in a week full of activities designed to bring awareness, interest, and advocacy to computer science education with the intention to continue increasing access and equity for all students. Do we have our slides by any chance? There we go. Perfect. Next slide. Thank you. So about the Kapor Center, for those of you who are new to our work, the Kapor Center's mission is to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the technology ecosystem so that the power and the potential of technology can be used to create a more equitable future. So my name is Allison Scott. I'm the CEO of the Kapor Center, and I'm joined by my colleague, veteran CS educator and justice leader, Shayna. Shayna, would you like to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Wonderful. For this year's hashtag CS is everywhere theme, our portion of the work is to think deeply about what it means and what it will take to effectively teach CS to everyone. So before I transition to Shayna to lead us through a lesson on identity and belonging, I first wanted to give a quick overview of how the Kapor Center is working to ensure all students have the opportunity to learn computer science. Next slide, please. So we have a three-prong strategy. We're focused on three areas. One is increasing equity in CS education. We all are incredibly passionate about that work. And we also believe that we need to work to advance racial equity in the tech workforce and also strengthen broader technology ecosystems to ensure that all students, communities, groups, and individuals from all backgrounds have the opportunity to participate in technologies, both promise and potential, as we mentioned. Next slide, please. For our CS education work, one of our main strategies is around research and advocacy. So we use research and data to drive some of this advocacy. In the past year, we've published, in partnership with my colleagues, a report on the CS landscape in California, also a searchable data tool that allows folks to understand where computer science is being taught by school, district, and county within the state of California. Shout out to my colleague Sonia Koshi and Laura Hinton, who helped to develop that, and work in collaboration with the CS for California Coalition. We also published a report in collaboration with CSTA on the landscape of CS teachers, and we will be doing another landscape survey coming soon. So hope you all will participate in that. Next slide, please. In terms of our programs, we have a magnificent team that is working on everything from teacher preparation to curriculum development to working directly with students and teachers and administrators. Some of you all might have seen earlier this year, we published a culturally responsive computer science framework. Shane is going to be talking about some of the core components of that framework that do have to do with building identity and belonging in CS classrooms, which we're really excited about. We also have launched an equitable CS initiative. So we have webinars that we put on every month to try to engage the broader computer science education community around topics related to equity in CS. We are also in partnership with UC Berkeley and another partner that, another pilot that Shane is leading to engage teachers in thinking deeply about racial equity in computer science classrooms. And we're also working in partnership with several different districts across the country. Next slide, please. And finally, we do all of this work in intentional collaboration with a wide network of amazing partners, some of you who are mentioned on this slide, and we are very grateful for their partnership. Together, we're working on things like teacher preparation, professional development, curriculum, student engagement, and policy advocacy change. Again, all of those components to address gaps of inequity and create opportunities in CS for all students. And we know that throughout all of this work, that the work that educators do day in and day out is absolutely critical to moving the needle on equity in CS and inspiring and engaging all students. So it is my pleasure to hand off to Shayna, our Senior Associate of CS Equity and Justice Initiatives, to lead us through a lesson on identity and belonging in CS classrooms. Shayna.
Thank you very much, Allison. If you can go to the next slide, please. First thing I would like to do, we do at Kapor Center with all of our events, is a land acknowledgement. We want to do this because not only do we want to respect Indigenous and Native communities in the United States, but also to literally understand our part in colonialism, the project of colonialism and colonization, and how that has negatively impacted Native communities. So I actually currently am in Oakland, California, which is the territory of the Xochitl and Lissian-Oli territories of Native peoples. We want to understand that when we do our land acknowledgements, that we want to pay respect to these peoples whose territories we reside, and to also build community with these individuals as well as others, and move towards liberatory practices for all who are infected by colonialism and imperialism. Next slide, please. So for our Teach Day, we wanted to talk about identities and belonging in CS. I believe that you can't teach kids unless you know who they are and that they feel like they belong in the classroom space at any time. And we felt that since the theme for this week is CS is everywhere, CS really can't be everywhere if everyone does not feel included and belong. Next slide, please. So as Allison alluded to earlier, there are 6 core components of our CRCS framework, and 2 of them tie directly to identity and belonging that we're going to talk about now. The next slide is going to go over all 6 of our 6 components. So you can see what we're trying to cover in our framework to make sure that CS is all encompassing, inclusive for all students, not just certain demographic groups. We want to basically make sure that we are truly reaching out to historically excluded groups like women and girls, non-gender conforming individuals, Black students, our Latinx students, and Native students as well. Next slide. So as you see the 6 core practices, the first one is pretty hard hitting, but that's why I like it, because we want to make sure that people understand that we have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is racism and white supremacy. Until we do that, we can't create culturally responsive, sustaining classrooms. We can't create belonging, and we can't create an accessibility and inclusivity for all students to feel welcome in the classroom. Core component 2 and 3 are the 2 that really tail to this identity and belonging that we talk about. We also talk about student agency and voice, family and community engagement, and then making sure that we're exposing students to diverse professionals. I think CSTA over the past couple of years has had a lot of CS heroes that are from backgrounds that are non-traditional as we think of the CS community. And we want to make sure that people continue to engage with individuals that are not what we stereotypically think are in CS. Next slide, please. So core component 2, broken down a little bit more in detail. Basically, I'm going to read it. It says inclusive and equitable classroom cultures are co-created to cultivate meaningful learning experiences for students and ensure belonging for all students. Individual and collective identity exploration are utilized as tools to create inclusive classrooms, ensure belonging for all students, and ensure equity. So core component 2 basically means if we don't sit there and actually sit and look what our identities are that we're bringing to the classroom and the identities that our students are in the classroom, and then what identities are not in our classroom, how can we ensure access, inclusivity, and belonging? So we want to understand that that identity exploration has to be done not only by the teacher, but also by the students to help build that collective community where everyone feels that their identity is going to be respected and recognized. Next slide. I think you skipped one, core component 3. Thank you. So core component 3 talks about pedagogy and curriculum. And we want to know that we have high expectations for all students. A lot of times people think that when something is culturally responsive and sustaining, that we lower the word rigor, which I do not like, but we basically are lowering expectations for students. Anything that is going to be culturally responsive and sustaining is always going to have high expectations for all students, no matter what their background, nationality, languages spoken, disability, etc. We always have high expectations for our students. But we also want to make sure that the students have experiences that are relevant and authentic to their interests and their experiences and their cultures. And then we also want to make sure that we examine the current socio-political context of the world around us, because computing and CS is everywhere and it is impacting a lot of people, and it is sometimes negatively impacting marginalized people groups. And so we want to make sure that students are aware of that so they can make sure to educate not only themselves, but their communities to kind of mitigate some of the harms that tech is causing their communities. Next slide. And so the theme is CS is everywhere. And I wanted to put this slide together just to show, because we have a lot of times when I speak to students, and I spoke to my students when I was teaching, they didn't think that certain things literally were computer science. And so people have to get out of the big misnomer that computer science is just coding. That is not what computer science is. That is a part, a piece, a portion of computer science, but computer science is a little bit of everything involving technology. So as you see in these pictures, it's not only social media, but it's esports, which is big. It's surveillance is computer science. It is production of music, production of videos, data collection. You talk about data stats with sports figures. Then you have with art, with fashion. So CS is really everywhere. It is not just coding, and we have to really broaden our students' understanding that CS is pretty much integrated into all the things that we do in one form or fashion, and that they need to learn these skills and be a part of these skills. But ultimately, we have to create that environment in which they belong and feel included. Next slide, please. So our first little Q&A discussion, and I think y'all are going to type it in the chat, or I think the two co-hosts are going to facilitate the discussion. If you can go to the next slide. I want to get a gauge from the audience of what belonging looks like to you, because that's the first thing we have to wrestle with. If we don't know what belonging looks like, then we don't know what it actually should be in practice. So what does belonging look like for you? If you can type it in the chat, or I don't know what the other mode is.
Yeah, and Shayna, as we're waiting for the comments to come in, I can also talk a little bit about my classroom and what does belonging look like to me, because like you said, it's so important to affirm the identities of teachers and students. And just today, we did a lesson on pixelated portraits. So the students integrating that content in with identity affirmations. So students actually were thinking about pixels and how digital images are made, while also picking different objects from their identity webs that they did to really bring in to the discussion who are you, what is important to you, in this lesson that I did with them for identity affirmation. So it was really powerful in bringing in the voices of the students.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll piggyback off of that in terms of what belonging looks like to me. So we're currently doing a unit on video game design. And so for my students, I'm always interested, what type of video games do you like? And as you know, video game design is a very creative process. I love that A in STEM, we leave out the A a lot of times, STEAM. And so I'm like, there's this kind of story driven process of video game design where you put in your own kind of thing into it in terms of what you like. And so I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I'm making kind of a space shooter because that's what's important to me. And so finding out what's important to them culturally and what they like to bring into their designs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it looks like we're starting to have some comments come in. So belonging looks like a safe place to grow, to be heard, and to be valued.
We have another one. Janelle VH from YouTube, belonging is feeling like a part of the whole.
And Mary says, being comfortable in the classroom, comfortable enough to make mistakes. And for Marie, students need to see themselves in the field, see these role models, just like Shayna was mentioning earlier.
We'll list off a couple more here. Haroon, please forgive me if I mispronounced it, says belonging is not feeling like an imposter, having diversity in the classroom and workforce. And then we have Sarah Lucas, who's telling us in the school setting, belonging is seeing yourself in the curriculum, characters in books, teachings of history, etc.
And we'll take a last one from Carlin, feeling like you are a part of the CS pipeline, regardless of how good you are at it individually.
Awesome. And those are all great kind of starting points for talking about belonging as we'll continue on here. Thank you, Sheila and Nate, for reading the comments, and thank you for those that did engage with the discussion prompt. If you can go to the next slide, please. So we're going to talk about actual specific definitions of belonging. A lot of people were on the complete right track as far as what belonging means and identity means. And we're going to talk about it a little bit more on a personal level so that you understand that this is part of the work. A lot of times people don't realize that the identity that you bring into your classroom every day is going to impact your ability to do the work effectively. And when I say the work, I mean the work of equity and justice and computer science education. So please make sure you understand that this is part of that work. We understand that the work is hard, but understand the results are fabulous when it's done with fidelity. Next slide, please. So belonging is a feeling of safety and support for a member of a certain group, where there's a complete sense of acceptance, okay? And I think that that's the huge thing, is in a complete sense of acceptance, inclusion, and identity affirmation. So their identities are affirmed. And when we talk about that, if we don't understand how identities work, the intersections of people who have multiple identities and how that impacts how the world sees them and how they see the world, we cannot fully make a student belong in a classroom. We want to understand that belonging is an emotional need that needs to be met. And I would like to personally give a shout out to the Blackfoot people who Maslow stole his hierarchy of needs from. But basically that sense of belonging is basically a staple in Native people's community. They make sure that everyone feels a part of the whole, that they are welcome and their existence is important just to be there. And so understanding that belonging is just that complete sense of knowing I can be my total self in this place without any reservations whatsoever. I have no fear that I can be who I am at all times because I know that I'm going to be fully accepted, I'm going to be fully included, and I'm going to be fully affirmed. Next slide, please. Identity is a collective set of characteristics to which a person is grouped or known by. Understand that identity characteristics can be visible so you can see them, and there can be unseen. As I mentioned to my students when I teach them about identity, identity markers that you can see would be if you're walking in a shopping mall. I know during COVID that was not very like a good example, but this was of course during pre-COVID times. But if you're walking in a shopping mall and you literally pass somebody at the food court, what identity markers could you tell by just looking at them? So we understand that that feeds into our biases and stereotypes, that we assume things about people based on some of their visible identity characteristics, and we sometimes mischaracterize people based on what their visible identity characteristics are. Understand that some identity characteristics can change or shift over time, and identity does provide the belonging, so they kind of go hand in hand. Understand that identity and belonging go hand in hand. My identity is affirmed, and so I feel like I belong in the place that I'm residing in at this point. Next slide, please. So here's an identity wheel. University of Michigan and a lot of people use these resources, but this identity wheel to me is really great because it breaks down all the many facets of people's identities. A lot of identity markers that you might not even think of as an adult. This identity wheel I did not use with students because there were some things that I was just kind of like, they're not going to understand like what that does as far as like as it changes over time and transitions. But I think this is a great identity wheel for adults to use. In my teacher PD that I've been working with, the set group of 26 teachers, we have worked with this identity wheel so that teachers can sit there and say, wow, where do I fall within this wheel as far as race and ethnicity or appearance or religion or income, and how does that impact how I come into the classroom space each and every day? Next slide, please. So what I do for students is I pull out the identity characteristics that they're going to understand a little bit more fully and identify with a lot more easily. So we talk about gender. We talk about gender as on a spectrum, that it is not a binary thing. And that's how I tie in computer science, because they always know when we talk about binary at the beginning of the semester, binary numbers, gender does not work that way. Gender is not a 1 or a 0. It can be a multitude of things. We talk about race. I give them what the US Census considers race in this country and what the US Census considers ethnicity in this country. And a lot of my students are surprised to find out that Latinx is not a race. It is an ethnicity. So a lot of times when we talk about kids of color or people say students of color, I always ask for specificity. Are you talking about Black students? Are you talking about Latinx students? Are you talking about Native students? So understand that ethnicity is one of those ones that can be tricky and can also change. So understand with ethnicity, Latinx is not a race, it's an ethnicity. And a lot of times kids conflate the two, and adults do as well. So understanding the differences between those two. Religion, sexual orientation, languages spoken, person's age is an identity characteristic, their disability. I always tell my students that I wear contacts to see, and that is considered a disability. A lot of times people don't think, oh, if I can't see well and I wear glasses, that is a disability. That is a disability. But because we have made so many accommodations for people who are unable to see, it doesn't necessarily feel like one. Maybe not the same type of disability as somebody who has maybe some other physical ailment or even some mental ailment that creates a disability that's unseen. So understand disability is also one of those ones, as I mentioned to my students, that's visible and invisible. Like looking at me right now, you might not know that I wear contacts. There are times that I do wear my glasses, so then you would know I'm disabled. So that's one of those ones you can't necessarily tell when you walk up to somebody. Somebody's place of birth is an identity characteristic, their class or socioeconomic statuses, and also their birth order. So if they're the oldest in the family, youngest, or middle child. Next slide, please. So now we're going to discuss the identity characteristics that you think about. And there are going to be several questions on the next slide. And I would love for the participants just to take one of those questions and say, wow, like, okay, let me take that and apply that to myself. So if you can go to the next slide. All right, so here's some identity debrief questions to ponder. Which identities do you think about the most often? There are some people that navigate spaces in certain identities that literally are so pronounced that they can't go certain places without that identity being shown, being treated a certain way, etc. What identities do you think about the least often? And for me, I would say disability, just because I do wear contacts and I wear glasses and I don't have to worry about necessarily accommodations with things as far as like, can I walk to get to this place? Do I have accessibility to this building? Whatever the case may be. So what identities do you think about the least often? What identities would you like to learn about more? And then what identities have the strongest effect on how you perceive yourself? And what identities have the strongest effect on how others perceive you? Because those are two totally different things. And understanding 4 and 5 are really complex, but it creates and generates great discussion with students because they sit there and they start to think like, wow, I didn't realize that people perceive me a certain way because of this identity marker, or I perceive myself a certain way because of this identity marker. So Sheila and Nate, I would love to like hear your answers to these questions while we wait for some of the answers to come in from the audience.
Okay. Okay. Sheila, do you want to start it off? You want me to start it
Yeah,
off?
sure. Actually, as you were, Shana, as you were mentioning all the different types of identities, one that came to mind that my students actually speak about a lot is their relationship identity, like sister, daughter, that type of family relationship, or even student to teacher type relationship. So when I think about what identities I think about the most often, when I'm thinking about just myself, I think about actually disability, which is kind of the opposite of you when you just mentioned that, because I have some family and friends that have invisible disabilities. So I think about that a lot. And I'm also a special education teacher. And I think about how to support my students, and that really comes to my mind. Now, when I think about identities, I think about the least often. I would say the income one. And I think that speaks of my privilege and being aware of that and being recognized. I have a job. I have that privilege to provide for my family. And I don't think about that too often. But they're still very important identities because they make up who I am. And with my students, I like to explore the other identities that we talk about in class, kind of similar to that circle diagram you said, but we do usually do a web for the younger grades. And actually, talking about building community, I feel like it's so important to build that safe community, especially when we explore sexual orientation with our students at the elementary level. So building community and learning more with my students.
I would say mine real quickly as we're starting to kind of get some things coming here in the chat. The identity I think about most often, honest to God, it's race. I mean, like we live in a hyper polarized world right now, and everything is getting attacked, from critical race theory to oh, they're brainwashing our kids. So as a Black man, I easily think about race first. The identity that I think about least, there are two that I didn't think about a whole lot until I would say relatively recently, and one was gender, in large part because being a man, and I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I'm like, oh my goodness, life is totally different, and like a lot of those inequities that come through in terms of how we treat women came through for me. And I would say disability is one I didn't think about often. My wife is a type 1 diabetic, so like having to be very cognizant and aware of medical conditions and how things are different, even from how we eat food, what can you consume, all these sorts of kind of things. And last thing I'll say in terms of kind of wrapping up 3, 4, and 5, I really want to learn, I think, really just about a lot of different identities. I always try and be kind of empathetic, or recognizing my blind spots. But yeah, I think like I look at myself more as a father, but don't really think too much about how people perceive me, I guess. But that's kind of a bit on mine really quickly as we get ready to dive into some of the answers on the side.
Yeah, I see some people have some comments already from Maria, and you from YouTube. I believe that my gender is the greatest effect how other perceive me the most.
Okay. We got another from YouTube, A. Lambert. When I worked in corporate as an engineer, my gender and race were front of mind. When I became an educator, gender no longer had a strong effect on how I was perceived. Very
Yeah, and that's
interesting.
the thing with your identities, like depending where you are going to
Mm,
impact which identities are going to come to the
Right,
forefront of your mind,
right,
and be front and center for you, and some will kind of take a back seat.
right,
Just depending on the environment, you think
right,
about, like, for you, Nate, as a Black man, engaging with a police officer is going to look a lot different for you than it might look for a white man. But
right,
then with you maybe engaging somewhere else would look different for you than it would be for that
right.
white man. So understanding our location can make a difference as
Right.
well.
Shayna, let me say two quick things on that.
Mhm.
So the community, so I don't mind saying my wife is white and we have a biracial child. The community
Mhm.
that we live in, for a very long time, I would not walk down the street without both of them. We live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and because I was very aware of the perception that people may feel threatened if they saw me, but if they saw me with both of them, they might go, "Oh, okay, he's a good guy." And my daughter being biracial, when we fill out certain forms and stuff, they don't ever have the option of biracial. It's always black, white,
mm,
other. And so I'm very aware of that now. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, what about that space for people who may have multiple,
Mhm.
races that make up their identity?
And
Absolutely.
that's a really great point. And this actually brings up the comment by Mary from YouTube. I feel like the identities that make us the most privileged are the ones we think about least.
And that's the point of privilege.
Right,
And that's the thing that I wish people would understand and wrestle with, is that that's what privilege is. If it's something that
Mm,
you don't have to think about, it's not something that stops you or impedes your day, then that is a privilege. And we all have them. And that's the part that I think people don't understand, is it's not something to be defensive about. Everybody is going to have some sort of privilege in any type of situation. And it's not, hey, I need to be defensive about this and be like, oh, that's not fair. No, how can I leverage this privilege to make sure that I make space for people that don't necessarily have the same privileges that I do? So Sheila, like you said, with socioeconomic level, I sit there and I think, how can I use my income status to help people that don't necessarily have the same income status as me? Same thing with like race, gender, etc. It's like sitting there and saying, hey, these are the privileges that I have. How can I sit there and make way for people, and leverage that privilege and that power that that privilege entails to make way for people that don't necessarily have the same privileges as I do.
yeah, very well said.
Awesome. Next slide, please. So who is a computer scientist? And what I did is I actually Googled computer scientist, I want to say maybe like about a month or two ago. And these were the first 6 images that came up. And this is stereotypically what everybody thinks a computer scientist is. I think the only picture I would say is missing is the dude in a dark room with the like black hoodie on, like typing up code at like 2 o'clock in the morning. But as you see just from these pictures, there is one person that it looks like is of color, and everybody else is white. And then we see no differences on the gender spectrum from any of these pictures. All of these people are presenting as men or males. So when we say who is a computer scientist and we see these images that inundate just a regular Google search, what do you think our students are going to believe? They're going to believe, if I don't look like this, then I'm not a computer scientist either. Next slide, please. So there's tons of research on this. Teacher diversity and representation matters. They've already done studies that have shown if a student has one Black teacher in elementary school, it reduces the probability of them dropping out of high school by 29%. That's a significant amount. Stereotypes about computer scientists, they impact interest in computer science among girls and women. So the stereotypes that we just saw on the previous slide, as far as Googling what does a computer scientist look like, and they see those pictures of all white men for the most part, most girls are going to sit there and say, there's not a place in computer science for me because this is what I perceive stereotypically what a computer scientist looks like. Perceptions of male-dominated careers, including tech, can impact the career decisions of women. Role models from similar backgrounds can help our LGBTQ youth develop strong and healthy identities. Same-gender peers and professors enhance women's self-concept in STEM fields. And fear of confirming widely held stereotypes about a marginalized group can affect both interest and performance in STEM fields. So that going back to those biases about identities. Do I have this bias about Black boys? Do I have this bias about students with disabilities as it relates to how they learn? And I take that bias into my CS classroom, and then all of a sudden it's going to impact that student's ability not only to be interested in the content area, but also going to impact their ability to be successful in that course. Next slide, please. And I love Kimberly Bryant. She's amazing. She's the founder and CEO of Black Girls Code. And she made this really poignant statement just because a lot of people will say you can't be what you can't see. And she's like, no, that's not true. You absolutely can be what you can't see. That's what innovators and disruptors do. So people that are really in this work, fidelity-wise, and want to make sure that equity is happening, you are going to make sure that kids see somebody that looks like them. You will make that effort to make sure that kids get a disrupted narrative of white male is what a computer scientist is, and you're going to make sure that they see something different, something that looks like them, something that they can sit there and say, I have the same identity markers as this person. Next slide, please. So here's some just examples of why identity and belonging in CS are important. Understand if you want to be teaching in a culture responsive sustaining method, identity and belonging have to be core to that work. And identity and belonging have to be brought in that work at the beginning of the year and constantly woven throughout the entire year. It's not something where it's a one and done thing where I say, oh yay, we talked about our identities and now we're going to move on and start typing in JavaScript. We have to talk about how those identities still get interwoven in our computer science curriculums inside our coding in order to be culture responsive. Understand you cannot achieve inclusion unless somebody feels that they belong, okay? And then we talked about, as it mentioned on the previous slide, a lot of students don't want to persist in computer science or feel it's not for them because they don't feel like they belong. And so if we want to have more Black and brown students, more marginalized identity groups represented in computer science, we must make sure that they feel like they belong every time they walk into our classroom. Students exploring their identities can be a powerful tool to help bring belonging in the classroom. When I've done this exercise with my students, we actually end the exercise with a non-computer based task where kids do identity portraits where they draw themselves, they draw the identity markers that they want to publicly share with their classmates. And we have an identity wall where all the kids' pictures are eventually put up. So I say, I want to be able to walk by this wall, and based on what you've put up there, I can figure out who the picture is about. So the kids take pride and ownership of the identities they want to share. They take pride and ownership of the things that they're interested in, the things that they like. And then when they come into the classroom every day, it's like, wow, this is our classroom. I always feel like I belong here. Demonstrating that students' identities are respected and recognized, and I mentioned that earlier on, can lead to positive outcomes in the CS classroom. So understanding that, like, hey, when I have a kid, I had my very first trans boy in my classroom a few years ago. And once that student understood that his identity was going to be respected and recognized, not only by me, but by his classmates, because we sat there and we built community and we talked about what does it look like to make sure that everybody's identity is respected and recognized, and how does that look on a day-to-day basis, that student felt comfortable being who they were. But ultimately, if I didn't make space for that, that student would not felt comfortable in my classroom and ultimately would not have felt like they belong and possibly would not have had a great outcome in the classroom as the semester went on. And then the utilization of counter-stereotypical role models can impact CS identity development. And I'm going to give you some role models that are different than what y'all have seen. These are people that I know, some people I know of and know of their work. But I want to show you that it is possible to find people from such unique, interesting identities that are in CS right now, that work in tech spaces, that are doing brilliant things in tech spaces, that kids can see a portion of themselves in these people. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here's the first person, Christy Tillman. I know personally, she lives out in California. And so for all these next slides, you're going to see the picture of the person, the personal identity characteristics they were comfortable in sharing with me that I could share publicly, and then their CS identities. So I want you to understand that personal identity and CS identity are two totally different things, but we have to find a way to bridge the gap so that those CS identities, kids can see themselves as a CS identity as well as a personal identity as well. So Black, cis, heterosexual, she's a woman and she's the oldest sibling. Some of the really cool things that she's done, she used to be the former head of communication design at Slack. She's also developed fellowships for underrepresented designers in tech. So Christy Tillman is one of our people in the CS space that is doing stuff that represents a lot of marginalized identities that kids could possibly see themselves in. Next slide. Next, we have Wells Santo. Wells Santo is non-binary, he's pansexual, he's disabled, he's mixed Indonesian and Taiwanese, and he's a first generation in the US. The other cool thing that Wells shared with me that I didn't put on the slide because he gave me so much great stuff was that Wells was on his own at 16. And the things that Wells has done in the AI community is phenomenal. He's developed AI for all high school curriculum. He actually spoke at the United Nations about the societal implications of AI. So this is somebody doing really impactful work in the AI sphere as far as CS is concerned, but also has a lot of marginalized identities that your students might be able to identify with. Next slide. Then we have Frida McLear. This is my phenomenal colleague that works here with me at the Kapor Center. She is Native American. She is Two-Spirit. She's a woman and she's an activist, but she also has a bachelor's in computer science. She also received a whole bunch of funding from the NSF to expand CS for Native girls. So once again, showing students identities that are not like their own is important to bring to every classroom, because you'll have students that will sit there and say, and this is one of the things that I impress upon a lot of teachers, is that we speak about Native Americans in a historical context and don't realize that Native Americans are still alive and well. And many of them are thriving. A lot of them are not because of colonization and imperialism, but Native Americans are here and they're part of our society, and we need to not speak about them in past tense. So understanding that your students need to see people that are Native American in their CS fields, that they are there. We have natives in tech, is very important to kind of squash the narrative that natives are just a historical demographic and not a live and a well demographic right now. Next slide. Ruben Harris, he actually is one of the companies that Kapor Capital funds, but he is the CEO of Career Karma, which basically helps people get jobs in tech and get training online. But he's a Black man, he's a brother. He actually is a professional cellist. So he actually has played in certain symphonies and his cello skills are pretty cool. He actually posted a video, I want to say like a couple of days ago, on his LinkedIn of him playing the cello with one of his siblings. He grew up in Atlanta, but he's doing a lot of really cool things in tech as far as diversifying tech and getting more Black and brown people into the tech skill. And he basically created his own company. So he's basically a CEO of his own company that he thought of, hey, I see this need in the tech community of helping people upskill their jobs and get tech training online. And so I'm going to create this thing. And that's what he did. Next slide. Sasha Costanza-Shock is non-binary, is trans femme, is white, and is an author. Really cool that Sasha works for the Algorithmic Justice League that's headed by Joy Bolawami, and does a really lot of cool stuff as far as inclusion and empowerment with mobile context and universal design. But this is not a stereotypical identity marker that you would see, a trans femme. But there are trans femmes in our classrooms across this country. There are a lot of different gender spectrum identities that are in our classrooms, and making sure that students see that there are these identities that exist in this space is important for them to feel like they belong. Next slide, please. Tawanna Petty As a Black woman, a mother, born and raised in Detroit, which some people have certain misconceptions about the city of Detroit and the types of people that live there. And the really cool thing that she's also a poet, but she does really good work with data for Black lives. She's been recently named one of the most brilliant 100 women in AI ethics. And she's really in the forefront of making sure that data and surveillance are not used to harm Black communities in the Detroit area. So she does a lot of great stuff in her CS identity, and then she also represents some marginalized identities personally. Next slide. Christina Marillo, she does, which is really cool. She saw a gap in the fact that tech photos did not show any Black or brown people. So she created women of color in tech stock photos. So basically she created a repository of photos so that Black and brown women can see themselves in tech. So she created that just because she saw that gap, but she also works in cybersecurity and information security. And her personal identity is she's a woman, she's a Latina, she's a mother, and she's an author. Next slide. And Ruman Chowri, she's a Bengali American. She's a child of Bangladeshi immigrants. She does a lot of stuff with transparency and machine learning at Twitter. And she designed language analysis tools to improve the gender balance of speakers in meetings. And she's a big time data scientist. So once again, somebody who is not necessarily a common identity that you would hear about, a Bengali American, is somebody doing great stuff in CS. Next slide. So just to kind of culminate what this presentation was supposed to do, I wanted to give you some examples that were no example that you'd ever seen before. I made sure personally that none of these people were people that were represented in any thing, etc., just so that you know that there are people out there that fit the non-stereotypical mold of who can be in CS. It is important for us to show all of our students this. A lot of times the thing that gets us tripped up sometime in this work is understanding, hey, I want to make sure that the identities that are in the room feel comfortable, but we also have to expose our students to identities that are not in the room. So if you think about if you're working in a classroom that's very homogenous, maybe it's majority white, majority Black, we still have to make sure that other identities are exposed to children so they can understand that their other identities exist, so they can learn to recognize and respect those identities. Incorporate role models and diverse identities and career trajectories. We talked about Ruben here starting his own company because he saw a gap. We saw people creating their own fellowships. There's a lot of different things you can do in computer science. So make sure that kids understand that there's so many different career trajectories. It's not that I have to go through high school, then go to college, and then I get a job. I might not go straight to college. I might take a year off. My career trajectory can be so different. So understanding and showing kids there's a lot of people that do things unconventional ways, but they still get to their end goal, which is doing something positive in CS. One thing I think is also important is sharing your own identity markers with your students. Now, that's not saying that you have to share ones that maybe you're not comfortable sharing, but like for me, the contacts and glasses one, I'm comfortable with sharing. I also share that I'm Black. I share that I am like heterosexual, I am a wife, so that my students know those gender identity markers that I present to the classroom, because that's going to shape how they perceive me and also how the world perceives me, but then also how I perceive myself, and it's going to impact my classroom space. And then the last one is having students just explore one of their identity markers and research current leaders. I just did this research literally over a few days of those list of people, but there's so many more people that I could have done that are out there. So understand this could be a great exercise to do in your computer science class, to have kids say, hey, this is an identity marker that's important to me. Let me see if I can find somebody else out in the computer science space that's doing great work in CS or really cool work in CS that has the same or shares the same identity markers as me. Next slide. Oh. So this is just time for a final Q&A. I think Sheila and Nate are going to come back on stage. So anybody that's on any of the YouTube, wherever you're watching from, if you have any channels for me about identity and belonging or anything I can answer for you, feel free to put that in the chat. And then we'll answer it as the questions come. And I think somebody has a question, Sheila, for you.
Oh, yeah. So it looks like there's a question from the chat. Sheila, can you share more about your pixelated portraits activity? Might this be a way to achieve what Shayna noted about student portraits on the classroom wall? And Shayna, as you were mentioning your portraits, I was actually like making a connection because in their pixelated portrait that they did today, so those of you that have attended some of my workshops from CSTA, I actually do a whole series where we build up to this in the primary grades, and they make an identity web first, either in their classroom, in the elementary school, in their primary classroom. But if the classroom teacher hasn't done the identity web yet, they do it in my class. And once they kind of brainstorm and we discuss many different characteristics of what makes up identity, like I share that I'm Chinese American. I share that I have she, her pronouns, and we get into a discussion about what that means. Students then also think about like if they're a chess player or a volleyball player, and they start thinking of symbols that could symbolize their different identity markers. And then once they choose an identity or two or three, and some of them actually do a portrait of themselves. But if they decide to choose objects, we then transfer that onto what I have graph paper for the elementary school students. And they literally color in every single pixel. And we go over what is a pixel, how is a digital image made like that. And they create this portrait or this picture that represents who they are, important identity markers. And then they caption it, and then we display it so they begin to see themselves in not only in the curriculum, but we refer to it later in our work together as we think about other people in CS. So,
all right. Thank you for that, Sheila. Definitely going to have to incorporate that in my class now. So we have a question. Do you have any recommendations for teachers that receive pushback from administrators and or board members when using or expressing a desire? We can throw parents in there too. Board members, parents, when using or expressing a desire to implement the CRCS, culturally relevant computer science framework.
Yes. Just FYI, anytime you go against the status quo, you're always going to receive pushback. So understand the status quo wants to maintain white supremacy and whiteness. So anything that is going to engage culture responsive teaching, anti-racist teaching, anything that's going to talk about stereotypes, bias, discrimination is automatically going to go against the status quo. So you're automatically going to receive pushback. So you have to acknowledge that you're okay with that. A lot of times teachers and people that work in schools really are not okay with the pushback. They want everybody to accept what they do. And so then you have to kind of do an internal interrogation to say, you know what, do I really want to do this work? Because there are going to be people that don't like me that are going to give me pushback. And a lot of times teachers struggle with that because we like to be liked. We like to be the sage on the stage. And so understanding if I'm teaching concepts that are against the status quo, I'm going to get pushback. The other thing I would say is to always enlist just the support of your students and your parents at the beginning of the year. I always start with making sure that I reach out to all of my parents and caretakers at the beginning of the year and let them know, hey, these are things that we're going to be talking about that are integrated into the classroom. Do you have any concerns, anything I can answer for you, et cetera? And then I also let the kids know and let the kids give me feedback on what things they want to talk about, so that student voice is also driving the conversation in the classroom. Because then I can take back to the parents, well, your kids actually want to talk about this, and I actually have the expertise to talk about it. And so I think enlisting that sense of community with your students and parents and caretakers at the beginning of the year is really important for not getting that pushback, because ultimately people have to realize in public education in the United States, what parents say ends up happening. So any pushback you get from board members and administrators, if the parents do not have a problem with what you are doing in the classroom, you're not going to receive that pushback from administrators, because the administrators, ultimately their job is to keep parents happy. And so ultimately you want to make sure you get the parents on your side at the beginning, and that's involving making sure you're including them in the classroom. A lot of times I tell my parents they can come in for classroom visits anytime they're concerned about what we're talking about in the classroom. So a lot of times it's just basically building that partnership with parents and caretakers to say, hey, this is what we're going to be doing. I want you to be involved in this process. If there's things you have concerns about, things you'd like to add, if you have aspects of your culture you want to bring and share that you're an expert in with my class, I would love to have you. Making sure that parents feel involved is the easiest way to fight back pushback from administrator and board members.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oh,
Yeah, I was just also going to add that it really helps to, when you're talking to administrators, just like piggybacking off what Shayna was saying, to really collaborate and bring to your administrators the curriculum that you're using. For example, one of the read alouds we do in the primary grades is the read aloud, Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson and a few others that was put out by the Bird Brain reading list. And they talk about segregation. And that's a book I use for my kindergartners and first graders and all the way up through fifth grade. And making sure my administration knows that, we're going to be talking about this in light of the fact that they are computer science heroes, but also they overcame so much and we need to talk about this. And our school formed an equity committee, and that really helps kind of bring the conversation to light. And I know some schools in New York City also have opened up the equity committee to parents to kind of have that voice, like Shayna was saying, with administrators, with teachers, so that it's a really collaborative effort. Because I think it's really hard when you get pushback from administrators or board members or parents. And as a teacher, I felt that heat, and it's uncomfortable, like Shayna was saying. And, we do have to sit with that uncomfortableness as teachers, and just realize that, we're grounding this in facts. We're grounding this in important work about the history of CS. And so remembering that and finding your teacher buddies like the CSTAs is a really great way to support you in the work that you continue to do.
Yeah, and ultimately realize, like you just said, Sheila, like be uncomfortable with that, but ultimately realize what you're doing is best for kids. And ultimately, as every teacher, our job is to do no harm, to do what's best for kids. And so do what's best for kids is to make sure that everybody feels included and they belong, and that we teach the truth at all times.
I really couldn't have said it any better, ladies. The only last piece I'll add as we get ready to wrap up here is I can't stress the importance of just like building partnerships, as you said, Shayna, with like your parents. Sheila, you talked about with the administrators. The more transparent you can be in upfront. This is why we're doing this. We all as teachers, we have learning targets, learning objectives. Students will do this because, right? And I'm always upfront. This is why we're doing this. This is why this is important. And so just trying to make everybody feel that their voice matters, because even those who are the most closed-minded, at least in my experience, when I, let them say, hey, you're part of this process too, listening to everyone, that tends to, at least in my experience, have calmed some things down. But with that, Shayna, I was over here snapping just the whole time. You were speaking to my soul. I'm sure you were speaking to Sheila and everybody else's soul tonight. And just really just want to thank you for what you did, what you talked about, really eye-informing. I'm an eternal student. I was sitting up here Googling terms as you were talking. I was like, wait, I ain't heard of that one yet. Let me educate myself. And so just want to thank you. Sheila, any kind of just comments there you just want to highlight really quickly as we get ready to wrap up?
No, thank you so much. I feel like we talked a lot and there's a lot of work to do and feel reinvigorated.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us. We're excited to partner with CSTA and all the other organizations for CSEdWeek. And we hope that these resources will help you. As it's on the screen right now, we do have a website that has additional resources, ways to get in touch with us, et cetera, to continue to do this work. And the only thing is we have to realize is that we have to do this work together. And so it's got to be a collective and a collaborative thing. And so we're always looking to support anybody that wants to do this work and do it the right way. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Once again, thank you, Shayna. Just for everyone who's here, we just want to remind you all, please join us tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. We will have the Poem Art Hour of Code led by code.org. It's going to be a live stream at 10 a.m. If you missed that one, you can catch it again at 1 o'clock, as I think there'll be a recording of it. But 10 a.m., join us, please, tomorrow morning. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a great evening.